Welcome to MetaPod, the podcast where we discuss operational execs and organizations that make and move stuff, and our common headaches, digital transformation, the forever labor shortage, and doing more with less. And now, the host of MetaPod, Ron Crabtree.
So it's Ron Crabtree here, your host for MetaPod, where we talk about those three common challenges that tangible goods-oriented companies, manufacturing companies tend to face. Almost every industry for that matter. It's the forever labor shortage, digitization, digital transformation of work, and having to do more with less, less of everything. And I've got a great guest here joining me here today. It's John. John, help me out with pronouncing your last name correctly.
Papastylianou.
There you go. So John, I'm just going to refer to him as John so I don't trip that up too bad. He's going to introduce himself here in a moment. But I'm really looking forward to this discussion because John's going to be really tackling, how do we improve engagement and improve efficiency on the shop floor? But he's going to introduce a notion here that's kind of new to me, the role of citizen developers. And so it's really about, how do we help organizations unlock those deep engagement opportunities to empower our frontline workers, and not necessarily just on the shop floor, but everywhere in our business processes as citizen developers. So I think this is going to be pretty interesting. And how do we make them uniquely positioned to build some practical digital solutions that really work and help them make the workplace more efficient in everything we do? So if you struggle with getting the frontline folks involved with your digital transformation initiatives, you're thinking about low, no-code tools, you want to foster a culture of ownership and innovation, then this is going to be a great podcast for you. So with that, John, tell us a little bit about you and your background.
Hi, Ron. Thank you for having me on your podcast. My name is John Papastylianou. I am CEO and founder of Cyzag. I've worked in manufacturing systems for the best part of the last 30 years. And, certainly in the first couple of decades, I noticed one large problem. We were taking a long time to deliver solutions to the shop floor, getting it out in front of the users, and then ultimately the engagement was very, very poor. And so, this always used to bug me, what was the point of spending all this time and effort getting these digital solutions in front of the users if they weren't ultimately going to use them? And that's really how Cyzag started and how we got around to, finding human-centric ways or design thinking ways to engage with people on the shop floor. And that's really where our passion is. That's where really our focus is. And that's ultimately what we're really trying to achieve, is build engagement from the shop floor up and make sure that digital solutions are used and valuable for the organizations that implement them.
Awesome. Thank you very much for that. So I'm going to ask you 3 different areas that you would suggest any organization should be looking at, thinking about, diagnosing, if you will. And we're looking for, why are we looking at that? Let's pretend we don't know a lot about it. We might be, on the board of directors or a trusted advisor. We need to walk down the hall and ask some questions. And I think we're going to tackle 3 things, right? A diagnostic around, the lack of engagement at the shop floor level, centralized tech decision-making without the ground level input, and then underutilization, this is the part I'm looking forward to, of the citizen developer potential. So give us those diagnostics. Help us understand why we look at those things and how do we measure that?
Well, the first one's pretty straightforward, right? If your people are not engaged on the shop floor, they won't be engaged in collecting information, using information. You've got this kind of situation where there's no single source of truth. Everyone's working in an own different way. Each shift is working differently. There's no form of standardization. It's impossible to collect and gather information, and there's basically no single source of truth out there. And, this ultimately leads to the next item, which is, you haven't got a way to be able to make decision making as close to the source as possible. And that's really what you want to try to achieve. You want to try and solve problems in the most rapid way possible, as close to the manufacturing process possible, not thrown over the wall and then someone comes along sort of a month later and has a look at the data and tries to understand the data, looks at paper log sheets and paper task sheets, and then, you know, we've seen it before, and it doesn't work. You're not creating any form of engagement like that on the shop floor. You're not solving your problems as they should, and ultimately people are not engaged in continuous improvement. So I would say that one of the most important things that we have in our organization today, and especially in constrained industries where there isn't a lot of money, the one thing we definitely have is people. And my belief is people who work in industry and manufacturing, I mean, almost always the ones I meet are deeply passionate, and they're there because they want to be there. No one stays up all night in a night shift if they don't like doing what they're doing. Right? It's not just about the money. It's not just about what's really important for them is that they enjoy the job they're doing. But we're really underutilizing those people. Those people are, first of all, the most knowledgeable about our processes. They are also the most entrenched day to day, and they honestly, in most instances, know how to solve problems on the shop floor. But we don't empower them. And so, how do we engage them on those levels? How can we build a structure where they feel empowered, they feel accountable for what they're doing, and then they are, as we say, engaged? Not just, I'm not talking about digital tools, but engaged in the process of improving day-to-day operations and efficiency.
So I'm going to interrupt here with a question then around this lack of engagement. As you walk into an organization, and if you're just going to walk out on the floor and talk to people to gauge, right, the level of engagement, what are your favorite questions? I'm just going to share one of mine. I've done a ton of Lean Six Sigma interventions for companies over the years to help them, launch or reinvigorate their lean programs. And one of my favorite techniques is go to the floor and talk to operators and say, so tell me what makes you crazy about the work? What is it that frustrates you, gets in your way, keeps you from being effective? And just listen to what they're talking about. Are they talking about, I don't have the tools, right? I don't have the information I need to do the job, right? Or, I'm given misdirection or whatever, right? And then I always like to ask a follow-on question. Excuse me, I got a timer that went off or shut this off. Thought I had all those killed. Anyway. And then the other thing I love to ask people is, how do you know if you're doing a good job or not, right? And just listen to what they have to say. Or, what is it that, when there is a problem, when something goes wrong, what happens, right? And you're just listening for, they're talking to you. Are you hearing, structural issues? You're hearing communication problems. And do you have a line of questions like that you like to use just to gauge that?
I mean, there are questions that we ask, but for me, it's not so much about the questions you ask. It's about observing what people do, showing empathy for them. I mean, I think it's very difficult for somebody like me who sits on the outside. It's part of this philosophy of citizen developers. I don't understand the process. I don't understand the bureaucracies, the politics, the history, the amount of time people have been in this. When I walk onto the shop floor and I start talking to people, I don't question them about the systems they're using. I'd rather say things like, show me how you do X and Y. How do you fill in your log sheets? How do you track the data? How do you know if there's an alert on the shop floor? Try to understand from their perspective. And very often what we do is we just take a step back and just watch people, just day to day, how they're working, how they interact, how they communicate with each other, how they access different pieces of information. And that gives a lot of information all on its own. Because when you ask people questions, they somehow give you the answer they think you want to. They give you the answer they think you want to hear, rather than what frustrates you day to day. They're not going to tell you about the pressures of the day to day. They're not going to tell you that there are 20 different systems. Most people don't realize that it's 20 different systems that are slowing them down. So it's very difficult for them to tell you. So watching people, measuring what they're doing, looking at the time they spend doing things, identifying waste in the processes. This for me is a lot more telling, because you catch people in their natural environment and their natural habits, rather than kind of getting them to give you information which is, perhaps tailored for what they think you want to know.
Yeah, it reminds me, I was working with a printing company one time, and the owner of the company was really married to his standard costing system, and they had a shop floor control system. They had operations. Operation one is cut the paper to size. Operation two is to print on it. Operation two is trim it again, right? Operation three is to die cut it. Operation four is to package it, right? Get it ready to ship off to the customer. They're making labels for beer bottles and paint cans and stuff like that. And they were just really married to, we have to log into the ERP system, record the setup time, and then we have to go do the work, come back and log in how long I took it and how much scrap I had. And they had to do that for every single operation. And I was watching that, to see if this aligns with what you're saying here. And I could see right away that as much as 25 to 30% of their time was just walking back and forth to a computer to record what they were doing. And one of the solutions we had was to set up a one-piece flow. So we co-located the equipment to trim it, right? We would start with the printed product, and then we'd go through the trim, die cutting, packaging, all in one flow. And I said, and we're not going to report each of those steps. We're just going to report it going in, report it coming out, how much time it was actually in there, and if they made any scrap, which collapsed the time for all that reporting from 25% of all the time worked to less than 5% of all time worked. The owner pushed back really hard on that because they felt like couldn't let go of, having that minutia for, trying to go back and look at what it actually cost to make something. So we had that was a different battle. That's kind of what I was fishing for here. What are we measuring for? What proves you have the opportunity? And I was just fishing for that a little bit here.
Yeah. So I would say that in the end, what we have is when we speak to people, they don't often know what they don't know, right? And in many cases, I'll give you an example. I was in a shop floor actually in Augusta, where the operator had a screen in front of them. They were typing in a manual reading, and then they were swiveling their chair around, and they had a SPC chart, and they were drawing a dot, and basically building an SPC chart manually. But the system they had in front of them was also an SPC chart. And I asked him, why are you doing this? And we get the classic answer. It's the way we always used to do it, right? So I often find is that work processes get layered on top of each other. As new people come into the organization, they have great ideas and a lot of energy, and they bring new enthusiasm, new work processes, but they don't sort of cut out the old ones. So when we're looking for opportunities, it's easy to see how it's generally speaking quite easy to see by observing where the waste is, where people are spending extra time. But you need to measure it, and you need to measure in the context that it's in. So you'll need to look at the shift team, its activities there. You'll need to look at the shift handovers. You'll need to look at the daily meetings. You'll need to look at how that data flow. I mean, we do something called an operations map where we actually map that out, where it's very clear to see the time wastage between getting this piece of information from here to here, the time walking from the desktop to go print a task list, whatever it is. So it's just about observing. You have to watch people doing what they're doing to really fully understand, but you must follow it from the beginning to the end of the operation cycle.
Yeah, thanks for that. And you did get to what I was fishing for. Is the product you're looking for is some level of observation and actually a measurement of how much time is spent, if it's wasted, if in effect, and then listening and observing what people go through to do their work. So that's really good on the first diagnostic. Let's pivot to the other one around centralized tech decision making without input. Sure a bit about what we're looking for on that one.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if you've ever had something forced onto you. I mean, you gave an example a little bit earlier about this guy was holding onto his piece. When decisions are made by people, and we'll come onto this in the opposite way when we talk about citizen developers, but when people feel ownership to something, very difficult to give it up. When they make a decision, they will work extra hard to defend why they made those decisions to get that solution or that product, or whatever it is. And when you're trying to create a solution which is based on creating engagement on the shop floor, if you haven't experienced the shop floor yourself, it's very, very difficult to be able to understand whether a specific solution is going to fit. And so centralized tech decision making is made from the context of technology. It's not made from the perspective of people. And that there is quite a large gap. If you're not solving for people's pain points, then you're not going to solve the problem at all. Technology is great and it can do lots of different things, but if you're not solving the right problems, your technology, it should be first the people, then the processes, and then the technology. And yep, you got your thumbs up, so you obviously agree. But I mean, for me, if we're not doing it for people, then what are we doing it for, right? And it's very difficult sometimes when I walk into places and I see people absolutely married to the technology they have, not willing to give it up, and just letting the problems continue to fester.
Okay. Very cool. So let's see here. Do you want to move on to the third diagnostic, or do you have more to say about this centralized tech decision making without ground level support?
Well, I guess one thing that's actually also leading into the next point, but one thing that you see in a shop floor, actually anywhere in life, if people have to work in solutions that don't really work for them, what they do is they find workarounds, and actually some great innovation comes from those workarounds. You'll see people in a packaging line finding innovative ways to package different kinds of product. So a lot of innovation comes from that. And if you can observe that and harness it, it's great. But we don't normally do that because we expect people to work with the systems and the processes we give them. So these workarounds are also creating this kind of these hidden inefficiencies, which harm the organization, because then everyone does everything in a different way. There isn't sort of trying to understand what works best and how can we use that to improve overall. Yeah.
All right, cool. So this third diagnostic, I'm really looking forward to this one, the underutilization of the citizen developer potential. Define that for us. Or what do you mean by citizen developer?
So citizen developers are, very simply put, people without sort of formal coding or software engineering skills, but it's the kind of person who's a domain expert, someone who understands the manufacturing processes, the people, the bureaucracies, the operational excellence system that is in place. And it's these people who are then able to, we want these people to be able to develop use cases and deliver them to the shop floor. First of all, we come back to the previous topics we had. When you build something yourself, you are engaged. You want it to succeed. You're able to put those ideas forward, and then you help create an engagement. I mean, in my previous roles in my career, I spent a lot of time working as an external consultant, trying to help build engagement on the shop floor. On shop floors, actually, that I never visited. It was my job to try and create that engagement. And it's an impossible task. I don't understand anything about those sites and those specific control rooms or those specific settings to really help. So the idea here is to bring that sort of development right to the edge of the shop floor, where you can build solutions that actually make sense, actually solve real pain points, and give it to the people to use. And that's how the engagement really sort of, it's almost like a network effect, like a network effect where engagement sort of exponentially grows rather than sort of slow incremental growth. And in the end, citizen developers are the kinds of people who ultimately are helping to solve day-to-day problems. And we see it in a lot of the organizations we work at, even outside. I mean, you'll be aware of a lot of sort of no-code, low-code tools, things like Power BI is a great example, great for reporting. We see a lot of organizations really taking that on board. And that is a great way to build solutions for the shop floor. Yeah.
All right. So if I could sum that up, what you're suggesting is that the assessment here is going out to the point of attack and trying to determine the degree to which we currently engage the people at the point of attack doing the actual work in fostering what needs to be changed and done differently to support them from a technology perspective. And you're just basically uncovering if there's a real gap, because in theory, if we're not engaging them, there's a lot of untapped potential in terms of opportunities, improve first-time quality, the amount of time it takes to do the task, and the amount of frustration folks, are engaged, are dealing with, for their day-to-day and task level work.
I mean, that's true, but in the end, I mean, maybe we make it sound a bit simple, but you need to have good governance and a good strategy behind it. It can't be
Yeah.
just left to people arbitrarily to create use cases, because in that,
Well, there you go. Now we're going to get into what do you do, right? If that's what you coming up next. What do you do? So the governance is absolutely going to be one of those things you have to put in place. So with that, let's pivot then. That was really
Yep.
good. So John, let's pretend the audience listening, they realize, oh, I do have a burning platform. We do have some gaps there. There's probably a lot of untapped potential that we
Mhm.
could get into. So what's the solution? How do you go out and actually do something to improve on that?
So there's two things. There's sort of two streams here that we need to think about. The one stream is sort of building the core, and the other
Mhm.
one is building the additional use cases. But first and foremost, for both of those, what's really, really important is you need to go, I guess you know the term, go to Gemba. You need to go to the
Mhm.
shop floor. You need to understand what the pain points are. You really need to listen and speak to people and really involve those people early on in the decision making or the solution uh, design, should we say. If you really, if you're engaging people really from the start, then they feel embedded, they feel engaged, and they want that to succeed. So they're also really part of it. But you also have to be able to evolve the solution step by step. It's not just about build it once, walk away. Actually, one of the pilots who worked at probably 3 years now ago, we actually sat side by side with the operators after, of course, listening to them, talking to them, and we started designing their deviation sheet. And we looked at it and we spoke to them, and they were really fascinated. And it was amazing how quickly they became engaged. By the next day, at Shonin, they had trained the next shift, even though it wasn't live yet, but they had trained the next shift, and the next shift had trained the next one. And by the next day, when we walked in, they had a list of deviations already listed out. And it was amazing to see. I mean, yes, it's simple, but I think when you take people's advice on board and get them engaged from an early stage, it really helps to define the right solution. And obviously, it needs to be attached to sort of operational excellence standards and guidelines, and you must follow sort of the company's trajectory. But if you can engage with people, listen to them, you're ultimately going to be able to bring them on board with you. And you're not going to end up in a situation where you spend huge amounts of efforts and resources delivering a solution that no one uses.
Yeah, so you have to have the governance, right? And a programmatic approach, if you will, to how do we make sure we actually do it, right? We can talk about engaging and all that, but how do you actually do it? And how are you going to measure that and make sure it actually gets done and happens in a programmatic way that ties back to the overall strategy and the objectives of the company? So that's really good advice on that. What else should we go do?
I mean, actually, maybe just one thing to go back on that. So the governance is
Sure.
important on different levels. So the core that I was talking about, those are the main activities that you want operators to take care of on the shop floor. That's log entries or shift books, shift handovers, disturbance tracking, routine management. Those are the main things, and that core really needs to be thought about well and should overlap very, very strongly with operational excellence system that you have in your organization. So that governance needs to be really tight. You need to have a good hold on that. You need to be able to build something that works for the entire organization so that you can then create a standard and use that standard to measure as time goes on. But then you've got the other side, which is what we're really talking about, the citizen developer side, where people like process engineers, production managers, even operators are able to build their individual use cases. And what happens then is that these use cases are then layered above the core. So the core remains fixed, but the additional use cases get layered on top, and they can feed back into the core. So if you have an alert in one of the systems, or you have like a deviation or that's automatically tracked, it then get alerts directly back into the single core, the single window for the operators. And they have an action directly that's linked to their shift handover and all these things to make sure that ultimately that deviation is dealt with and the problem is solved. You don't have to wait for Monday morning when production manager comes back to solve that problem for you. So it's really about creating this first solid core and then building use cases above. And the citizen developers are really fundamental to that piece about building these individual use cases that build on top of the core.
Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks for explaining that a little more.
Yeah.
Cool. So what's the next go do recommendation for the audience?
Yeah. So I think so you can start building, right?
Right.
And with a no code platform, the idea is that you can build super quick. But you need to remember that iteration is an extremely important part of this. Iteration is fundamental, just
You're
because
saying iteration, correct?
absolutely iterate.
Okay.
Yeah. Just because you build something doesn't mean it's right. 99% of the times it's wrong. So iterate as much as you can, get feedback. You need to close that loop so that people can give their feedback and you can resolve those issues as time go by. And as you're rolling out to more and more parts of the organization, the more feedback comes in, you see commonalities and you'll say, okay, we really need to deal with these kinds of issues. A lot of people are experiencing the same thing. So you need to iterate. So the kind of platform you're using needs to allow very strong standardization, but it needs to be flexible so that you can iterate through it and be able to build a long-lasting solution.
Okay. Awesome. What else would you have from an advice perspective for the audience that they should go do to make sure we're maximizing these things?
I mean, some of the things sound obvious, but they're not. You need to give people access to be able to do what they need to do, right? And I say that because, I came across this once where a really, really smart young lady wanted to build these use cases. And she kept coming to me and saying, okay, I want to do this and this and this. And then she'd come back again. I said, but have you done the other one? She says, no. And I said, why not? It's because I haven't got an access yet. I was like, come on. So getting access is really important. Giving practical training, really helping people understand what they can do. And as soon as you start doing a little bit of training and people marry the concepts of sort of no-code development together with their day-to-day experience, that's where the innovation comes. That's where the creativity and the imagination comes in to create really, really amazing solutions. I mean, there are so many solutions that have been built. So, for example, in our platform that I don't even know about because there's so many people. But you need to enable this level of citizen developers so that they feel empowered to go and build these great use cases. They're really helping solve sometimes short-term problems, sometimes long-term problems. For example, one of the process engineers at a plant in Sweden we're working with at the moment, they built they had the core ready built, and one of the process engineers wanted to build they're having issues with steam consumption. So they built this tracking device and or this tracking use case, engaged it directly with the operator's sort of single window. And within a month, they'd already started measuring sort of 150,000 euros of savings per year in steam consumption, just because they were able to engage the operators in the right way. So you need to find the right people, give them access, give them the right training. And actually what we see a lot of is that within the organizations we work with, they build this community of citizen developers. It's not just sort of, these lone sharks going ahead and flying a flame. People start to work together and collaborate and start to come up with really, really smart ways to be able to develop use cases, especially around sort of variable cost tracking and asset efficiency.
So this is pretty darn interesting. So I'm beginning to wrap my head around this, and I think I want to confirm. So what you're advocating around this notion of the citizen developer is, in effect, empowering folks at the point of attack in manufacturing to do some of their own coding, low or no coding tools, and empowering them to actually develop their own solutions on the fly, which is wow, compared to how most organizations, where everything has to flow through the IT shop, it's got to have, be approved by IT, it's got, blah, blah, blah. But you're suggesting create a safe environment. And this is the key thing here, a safe environment with the right tools at that level so they can do the small little things that add up to a big difference themselves and not be trying to get on that list, of IT projects. IT shops are already 120% loaded, right? They don't need another project to do. So you're advocating that we're basically empowering the workforce at the point of attack to effectively do their own programming.
I mean, to be honest, I couldn't have said it much better myself. I think you nailed it completely. And you're absolutely right. The average backlog for an IT department in manufacturing is over 12 months. And if you can find ways to get people to continue to innovate and build without affecting IT, then it's essentially taking the load off them. But we do need to remember that there are some things like data structures that are fed into a no-code platform. So we do try to source raw data or live data or data from your SAP or your ERP systems, sort of work orders. Those kinds of things do need to be dealt with by IT. So they build the overall infrastructure, the data integrations, and set up the platform for citizen developers to build the solutions.
Awesome.
Yeah.
This has been pretty amazing. Before we get into wrap up, anything else, any other gems of wisdom that you might offer to the audience to think about?
Look, I think it takes a lot of courage to decide to go down this journey, because it's not the traditional way, of course. You need to trust your people and really believe that they can help your organization go forward. So I think it takes leadership with a very strong vision about how they can get their organizations to change, and we have to change, right? There is so much coming towards us, and if you're not empowering those people, you're not. I mean, there's lots of things that you're solving at the same time. For example, tribal knowledge is all going missing. You mentioned at the beginning of the podcast how it's difficult, first of all, to get people to come into manufacturing. There's an aging workforce, a lot of people leaving, and a lot of knowledge just disappearing. If we don't have a robust way to capture that knowledge, so that, of course, so we can use it with AI and all these things, I think we're going to struggle to get to encourage the younger cohort to come in. We're going to struggle to get to be able to transfer the knowledge, to train them, to do all these things. So leadership is fundamental here, but leadership needs to be able to see the full benefit here, which is engaging people, helping them do their day-to-day jobs, build efficiency, capture their knowledge digitally. Because if you can do that, the next steps are going to be much, much easier. It's no good bringing, for example, AI tools in if you haven't captured the right knowledge, without bias, without error. Can't scan all these pieces of paper from 7 decades of work, right? So the idea is to capture the knowledge well and have and be able to reuse it later. But like I say, leadership is fundamental here. Without that, I think you're going to struggle.
Yeah, this last, couple minutes is like super powerful. And it ties back to, one of the things we're actually running a survey, benchmarking study for, the North American market in particular around the forever labor shortage. And in that survey, we got 9 different categories of things that you can undertake to cope with the fact that we're shorthanded and what's going to get worse, right, across the board for the workforce. And one of the key things in that, the first element, is around being an employer of choice. And what you just talked about is crucial around the workforce development strategy, closing the wisdom gap as the exiting boomers, leave the workforce, but also a generational slant for, how are we going to attract and keep the workers of the future. They have a different view of the world and expect to be engaged and using technologies more effectively. And so what you just said there was super powerful. Thank you for sharing that. So, John, if people are like intrigued with what you had to say, want to pick your brain and ask you questions, how do they get in touch with you?
They're engaged on LinkedIn, so you can reach out to me on LinkedIn. My email address also is john@cyzag.com. It's a nice and easy to remember, john@cyzag.com. And our website, cyzag.com, you're more than welcome to visit. We also have a way to book a meeting directly with me from there.
Awesome. Well, John, thanks for joining me.
It's my pleasure, Ron. Thank you very
Awesome.
much.
So, you can find MetaPod and listen to these podcasts at Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, YouTube, and be sure to like and subscribe. And we have new episodes coming out every couple of weeks. And follow me on LinkedIn. That would be really cool. And then you get to learn more about what I'm doing and other podcasts I'm participating in as a guest, because they're pretty cool. Been showing up on other people's podcasts quite a bit. And then follow Meta Experts, my company, on LinkedIn too. And because we're going to highlight, some of the things our experts are out there doing, some of the things they're learning, articles and more information to help us be successful. So again, thanks for joining me.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining MetaPod. For requests on topics or to ask questions, you can connect with Ron Crabtree 3 ways: via email at metapod@metaexperts.com, via LinkedIn, or by calling him directly at 734-425-1455, extension 103. Lastly, if you love the show, please consider leaving a 5-star review on your favorite podcast app. We truly appreciate all your support.